Good morning. This morning we are fortunate to have a couple local community members with us that started a group almost 1 year ago. The group is WAADE, which means Westfield Area Addiction, Drug, and Education. Lisa Button, furthest to my right here, is one of the founders, as well as Laurie Wood. And Laurie coordinates the drug awareness or school awareness, and Lisa works on the community awareness. So we are very fortunate to have local members of our community that are trying to help prevent drug abuse. Their message this morning is called "This Is My Story," and obviously I know you're going to pay close attention. We have some of our students with the assistance of Mr. Wert helping them, and the format I think you will find quite interesting. So please give them your undivided attention as you listen to some of the testimonials from them and from some other folks that reside very close by. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tristin, and this is my story. I was actually born and raised in a little town right outside of Philadelphia called Haddonfield. Growing up, I thought I had a pretty normal family. You know, a mom, a dad, I had an older brother and a younger brother, and as a middle child, I almost felt like I kind of fell through the cracks. My dad kind of gravitated towards my brother. My mom kind of gravitated towards my little brother, and that kind of just left me in the middle. You know, and growing up, I isolated a lot, didn't really hang out with my brothers too much, was always chilling at my friend's house. My mom always asked me why that was, and I really never knew why that was. And really, it was because I didn't feel like I really belonged with them. And so, going up into elementary school, I started acting out, and then, you know, I kind of realized that got me a lot of attention, and I liked that. I enjoyed being the center of attention. Negative attention and positive attention didn't really make a difference to me. I just liked the fact that people were noticing me. And this theme kind of carried throughout my entire life. And another thing I learned early on was if I lied, I could get what I wanted just by manipulating the situation. This kind of struck me. I'll never forget this. When I was younger, I didn't really feel like being in class, so I complained about a headache. Went to the nurse's office, and she was like, "Is it bad enough where I have to call your mom?" And that was the easiest question in the world for me to answer. I said, "Yeah, please call my mom." Got out of school early, and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So, you know, growing up, I liked attention, and I liked to lie. And both of those, you know, are not healthy things to be doing. And all throughout elementary school, I did it, and with my group of friends that I made, I always wanted to be the coolest, the most fun, easiest to talk to guy out of any of them. So I almost saw it as like a competition, and in my mind, this is something I never knew I did until recently, but I almost had everybody ranked. I saw it as a whole social ladder that I had to climb. All I wanted to do was be at the top. And I felt like I did that. Even though it probably wasn't true, I'm sure a lot of my friends hated the stuff I did, but I felt like I was on top of my game. And going into middle school, it was the same deal, just with new kids. Then all of a sudden, when I went into high school, there were so many more people than I never experienced, a lot of just new stuff going on. And, you know, I felt the social pressure of, you know, wanting to get up there and be the most fun guy, showing off how, like, cool I was and how I was super fun to hang out with, really because I just wanted that attention. I wanted to feel like I fit in with everybody else. Because my whole life, I didn't really feel like I fit in. I felt like I kind of forced my way to fit in, and I really never knew who I was. So then going into high school, you know, kids on the football team were talking about smoking pot and drinking on the weekends. And, you know, I had the DARE program when I was younger. I don't know if they still do that, but I was adamantly against all drugs, any drugs. I thought all that stuff was kind of for losers, to be honest. And so, you know, The first few times they asked me to smoke weed, I told them no. And eventually I was like, you know, if I smoke weed with them once, they'll like me, they'll think I'm a lot more fun, and they'll hang out with me. So I'll do it once, and I'll just tell them I didn't like it. And because, you know, once again, I was just going to lie my way out of this mess. And so I did it, and I guess I liked it enough where I wanted to do it again. You know, because these kids started calling me now, the kids who I thought were cool, they were calling me, willing to hang out, hitting me up on Facebook, like all that stuff I always wanted, they were now doing, and I saw it as a direct relation to the fact that I was using drugs. So I dove into that head first. You know, all of a sudden, it was like I found my identity through drugs. I was just going to be that kid who was always smoking weed, drinking Friday, Saturday, Sunday night on the weekends. And, you know, it wasn't going to be a problem because, you know, I wasn't going to develop a drug problem. Because at this point, I thought it was a choice. I thought I could just walk away whenever I wanted. You know, lo and behold, I had a long road ahead of me of using drugs. So all throughout high school, I just did this. I experimented with all sorts of, you know, psychedelic drugs, cocaine, all that kind of stuff. And once again, I never thought I'd do any of that stuff growing up. I was scared to smoke weed, and now I was doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And towards the end of high school, I didn't think I had a problem, but I noticed I seemed to be doing more drugs than just about everybody. And I thought that was cool because, you know, if I could drink more than you and then smoke more weed afterwards, it's like, who in the right mind could you tell me that I wasn't basically good enough to hang out with you? If I could do more than you, I was definitely, you know, eligible to chill with you. And going into college, it was like a whole new ballgame. All of a sudden, I was going to have no friends, not know anyone, had no connections. And for the past like 5 or 6 years, all those connections I made through drugs. So this is like my first serious crisis I had in my life that was related to drug use. So when I decided to do it, I would just start selling drugs in college, which would mean I'd be hanging out with people who did drugs, who could then be my friends. And that's kind of what I did for my first few years of school. And you know, at first I thought it was pretty awesome. Even though I was doing terrible in school, I wasn't going to school for the education, which I know is something I kept being told. When you go to college, make sure you do it for the education. I did it for the party life and just for the social life. You know, I thought I was king of the world at the time. I made a girlfriend through drugs. You know, I thought she was a dream come true. My whole posse I made through selling drugs and meeting them, I thought that was awesome. And this whole time it never struck me as a problem that my entire life revolved around doing, selling, and just being around drugs. I started, you know, experimenting with painkillers, Oxycontin, Percocet, Rococet, all that stuff. And once again, I didn't think it was a problem because I could just walk away. My girlfriend was doing them a lot. You know, she had like a lot of money, so, you know, it wasn't a problem. And, you know, I didn't think it was a problem. I didn't even think it was a problem when I had to do them to get out of bed. I just like to tell myself, I'm just in party mode 24/7. Because that's what it always was to me. It was just a non-stop party. And, you know, it all kind of came to a head. Towards the end of my junior year of college, I just was doing more drugs than I ever thought I would. I actually, along the way, ended up switching to heroin because it's cheaper than Percocet, and they're literally the same thing, just one of them's given you by a doctor. It's the only difference between them. And, you know, and I still didn't think it was a problem. I thought it was all good because I could just walk away from it. And then, you know, my girlfriend ended up going to rehab. My friends, one by one, started drifting away because they didn't like who I'd become. I didn't like who I'd become, but yet I still found that I could not stop on my own. And it, you know, it truly disgusted me, but at the same time, as long as I was getting high, it couldn't bother me that much because at least I was high. And, you know, it's just an awful mindset to have, and it really ruined a lot of relationships in my life. You know, I burned a lot of bridges. A lot of people don't want to talk to me anymore. And, you know, that's just something I got to deal with. And, you know, if that had to happen for me to realize I have such a problem, so be it. I ended up dropping out of college towards the end of my junior year. I went home to get clean. You know, actually, I went home to quit opiates and the painkillers and the heroin. I didn't really care to ever quit smoking weed. That was so much a part of who I was. I always assumed I was going to smoke weed until I died. Like, every day, all day. That was my whole motive in life. And, you know, so I went home. I just went cold turkey on my couch. I had to tell my parents. They weren't too pleased, but I talked them out of sending me to treatment, being like, you know, I just have to stop the opiates. That's the whole problem. I don't have a drug problem. I just have a heroin problem. You know, which sounds ridiculous to say because heroin's a drug. started doing prescription pills again because I was telling myself, at least it's not heroin. And within about 3 weeks, I was doing heroin again. And every day of my life consisted of waking up sick, feeling terrible, like the worst flu I've ever had, and there's glass in your bones, wondering how I'm going to get high. Usually I sold pot to get high, so then I could go buy heroin with that money. And I did this every day for about 8 or 9 months. It was absolutely miserable. You know, I didn't think I was so miserable towards the end. And then towards the end, it just became so overwhelming. My life was just literally waking up, doing the same thing every day. The risk of getting arrested was daily because I had to drive to the inner city to get it. And it was totally almost a useless existence because I was doing nothing with my life. And eventually, you know, my parents confronted me a bunch of times, drug tested me. I outsmarted the drug tests. They just got around them. And then eventually they got me once when I wasn't prepared. And, you know, I gave them urine that failed for opiates, and they were like, you either have to leave the house or go to rehab. And, you know, since I was selling weed, I had an income, and I was like, you know, I don't need to live with you guys. I'm 21 years old. I'm old enough to do what I want. I don't need this. So I lived out on my own. I lasted about 2 days, and then I called them back, and I was like, I'm ready to go to treatment. I'm willing now. I went to treatment, and it was one of the greatest things I ever did. I went away for 90 days, and in that time, first off, I learned that I could make friends sober. That was like the biggest thing for me. And I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but to me, it really was. I kind of found out who I was a little bit. I fell back in love with playing video games, reading, just being around people. Because those are all the things I liked, but I thought I could only enjoy on drugs. And I was so excited to not be physically dependent on the drug. I rode that out for like 7 or 8 months. People were telling me like ways to stay sober, and I was like, yeah, we'll see. This is working for me so far. And you know, I started hanging out with my old high school buddies who were doing drugs, just not, you know, not the prescription pills and the heroin. And you know, I saw the life they were living, and I was like, man, I missed that. I think I'm going to try to do that again. So, you know, I told my parents I was going to start smoking weed and drinking again. They were very hesitant about it, but at the same time, they knew they really couldn't do anything to stop me because I was fully self-supporting at this point. So I did it. And, you know, at the time, I thought it was awesome. I was like, I've been missing this whole time. This is so sweet. Looking back on it, it wasn't that fun. It seriously wasn't. I just, you know, I built it up in my head to be some epic thing that I really wanted to do. So when I did it, I wasn't going to, you know, tell myself how disappointed I was that it was kind of lame. But, you know, I did it. I ran with it for a few months. And then, you know, before you know it, started doing prescription pills again. You know, the Percocet, Rococet, and then boom, that was too expensive. So I did what I did best. I go back to doing heroin. And you know, I remember when I was back, you know, in the whole dope sickness, waking up, puking, all that stuff. I was like, how did it get back to this point? It just showed up in my door one day. And if you trace the problem back, it really started with the pot and the booze. But you know, that's not something I was willing to admit because that was so much of a part of who I was. For me to then just say that that was wrong and that I can't do that would like basically put me back at, you know, ground zero in terms of finding out who I was. And, you know, this second time around, things got a lot worse for me. Even my, you know, my college buddies had long abandoned me. My high school friends were real worried about me. They didn't really know what to do because they know I'm a stubborn dude. So if you start telling me what I have to do, I'm just going to do the opposite. So they just kind of let me free fall. They just let me isolate myself because, you know, I don't want to hang out with anyone on heroin because I'm a miserable person. So why would they hang out with me? So they just let me do my own thing. You know, I kind of just fell into basically a self-made prison of using, scheming to get money. I stole a lot of money from my little brother. I feel real bad about that because, you know, he was working hard, going to school, doing all the right things. And I would just wait for the moment he'd wake up and go to work so I could just rummage through his room to take his money. And, you know, he'd ask me if I took his money, and you know, I'd always like concoct some story about it. And like sometimes I'd say, yeah, and he'd give me 20 bucks back when I took 80. Just stuff like that. Stole a lot of money from my mom. I manipulated my dad into giving me money because I'd be like, you know, mom's being mom, I need some money kind of thing. And you know, I ran with this for like 13 months. And then it all kind of came to a head. One morning I woke up still high from the previous night, had to go into work. You know, I needed drugs to get through the work day, which, you know, is something my boss was not cool with. And so I ended up taking my car to the city to get drugs, crashed my car, hitched a ride home to my house. I took my mom's car, and then I crashed that car. Literally within 15 minutes, I totaled 2 cars. And it was all because I was high, and I needed to get more high, which sounds outrageous, but in my mind, it made the most sense out of anything. And you know, I still managed to get to the city that day in a complete blackout. A lot of bad stuff could have happened. I deserve for a lot of bad stuff that happens. It's not it's not a good thing to do any of that. But you know, luckily it didn't, and you know, that let me survive to tell my story to you guys. You know, growing up, I never thought I'd be a drug addict. No one wants to be a drug addict. And B, I never thought it would happen to me. You know, because there's always some kids who drank a little bit more than me, or did a little bit more drugs. So I always put it off on them. I was always like, they're the addicts, not me. You know, it could never happen to me kind of thing. You know, I'm here to tell you it can happen to you. So walk away.
Good morning. My name is Laurie, and this is my story. When my son Jacob stood on this stage in 2009 and received his diploma, he didn't aspire to be a drug addict, a heroin addict, but that is what he became. I'll apologize in advance for not being able to tell this in complete, true chronological order, but when you're dealing with addiction, history tends to repeat itself. The lies, the theft, jail, rehabs, homelessness. It's a vicious cycle. The timeline becomes pretty blurred. Obviously, I don't have time to tell you 6 years worth of stories, but just know that in between the major events that I'll describe today, there were many, many visits to county courthouses between Tioga County and York County, many visits with my son in jail, a lot of things that I don't have time to share, but we'll be willing to afterwards. The story really begins when Jake was diagnosed with severe Crohn's disease in 6th grade. He had his first major surgery that same year, and that was followed by 6 years of hospitalizations, many treatments, infusions, so many medications, I couldn't keep them straight, but a lot of medications were for pain. We had our concerns, but Crohn's is a very painful disease, so even though we were concerned, we knew they were necessary at the time. It was in his senior year that Jake spent 5 years in the Cleveland Clinic having his second major surgery. I knew we had a real problem on our hands then because he was very reluctant to leave the hospital and the pain meds that they were giving him there. But he did eventually recover, and the doctors deemed him in remission. And this is when his spiral downward began. It wasn't long after graduation. Jake was still just 17 years old, and he was in desperate need of those pain medications that were no longer being prescribed by the doctors. He had already sold all of his possessions, phone, laptop, game systems, TV, anything he could get his hands on. He had already conned us out of more money than I can tell you. He spent all of his graduation money. So now he needs to buy the drugs on the street. He's at a dead end, so he visits his grandmother. He steals blank checks from her checkbook, writes them out for several $100s each, forges her name, and cashes them at local stores. This is when his first real long-term relationship with the law began. Now, these were some serious felony charges, but we convinced him to turn himself into the state police that time. So he was given probation and community service and required to pay fines and restitution. But he continued to use. He went into 30-day rehabs on at least 3 different occasions, usually when he felt cornered by the law and was fearing more jail time, or he was feeling threatened by a dealer for unpaid debt, or he was simply at a dead end and he was dope sick and had no means to score any drugs. It was after his 3rd stay in one of these 30-day rehabs that he decided he couldn't come back home again to the same habits, the same friends, the same environment. He found placement in a halfway house in York, PA. And he was doing quite well in that structured environment. But one day a routine drug test gave a false positive. And as per the house rules, he was required to leave the house for 24 hours. So he called us that night from a park bench in the middle of York, PA, in the middle of winter with a backpack and a few of his belongings, no money and nowhere to go. We did wire him money for food and lodging that evening, and he went back to the home the next day, tested negative, but he was so angry at the situation they placed him in that he decided to leave the program. This was a life-altering decision for Jake because it led him to Franco, the heroin dealer. Jake ran with Franco on the streets of York for close to a year, using and indirectly dealing heroin. Then one day, Franco made the mistake of selling to an undercover cop. And all three of them, Franco the dealer, Steve the driver, and Jake the lookout, were arrested and taken to York County Prison. This is when he began a new relationship with the law in that county. This is also the very first time that I ever bailed my son out of jail. And there were a lot of times he was in jail. And as a mother, I felt that I couldn't leave him in that prison setting with people that I knew he had done this crime with, because the attorneys were asking Jake to turn evidence against Franco. They really wanted Franco. So I knew that could be a dangerous situation for him. I bailed him out and brought him home. But the story didn't change. Jake continued to use. He's back here living in Westfield at this point in the story, but he's no longer allowed to stay in our home. So he's basically homeless, crashing wherever he can, using with whoever will share with him. And he has no job, no desire to get a job. His only concern is his next fix. Once again, he visits his grandmother, steals some checks, forges their name,